this is the end result, and now let's start from the very beginning. I keep brushes in oil and I regularly change it. This saves me time, and also this way brushes live longer. Anyways, so this is an acrylic primed canvas. I knew that this painting will be mostly in beige and gray, and this is how I primed it. So I start with finding where the trees will grow and how thick they will be to just figure out the whole composition. I use blue and burnt umber to get this very dark gray. Working with limited palette is actually quite useful in a way that when you need to make a correction, it's easy to achieve the same color composition. I paint with oils and water-soluble oils, and I mix them and never had a problem. Brushes are of two types, bristle and synthetic. With the shape of them are flats or filberts or round brushes, and also liner brushes for final details. This whole process took me 2 days. Well, actually it can take longer if you use oils as your medium, meaning linen oil, for example, because the whole painting has to be dry before you start doing the second part with glazes. Since I use mainly water-soluble oils and I also paint fairly thinly, I can glaze literally the next day. And because we live in High Rockies, Colorado, the air is extremely dry in here, so the oils are drying very fast. This little painting took me maybe 3 or 4 hours and full drying time in between. In my videos, I'll try to avoid complicated terminology, but some terms are unavoidable, unfortunately, like paints names. But again, I don't want you to imitate my paintings, so I will just name the paints warm brown or cool blue. So I'm still painting with basically 2 or 3 colors, brown, blue mixed with gray if I need a lighter hue. And since I'm painting on the sides too, I want to complete the painting from all the surfaces simultaneously. And my hands are different because I am quadriplegic, meaning I have a spinal cord injury and I use wheelchair. And you can hear by my voice that I have a huge accent because I'm from Ukraine. And if it hurts your ears and if you don't like the way my hands look, just find a different channel. And with that, let's go back to painting. Now all the happy trees have found their places and I am casting shadows. So I'm looking where the light is, and it's slightly behind and on the left of the painting, and so the shadows go into the opposite direction. They go slightly towards the right bottom corner of the paintings. I'm still using the same combination of paints, namely burnt umber, which is warm brown, blue, Prussian blue, I think, and a little bit of ultramarine, French ultramarine. So, trees are gray, they're not black. It's burnt umber plus Prussian blue plus French ultramarine. And for the shadows in the snow, I add Portland Cool Gray by Gamblin. It's a great paint. It's quite strong. It's comparable to titanium white, in a way that it's a little bit of that paint in a mixture lightens up the whole mixture very easily. I'm still blocking in color of the shade, but now I went a degree lighter and I add a tiny bit of titanium white in the mixture. So this is, let's say, a shade which does have some reflected light in it. Snow is very shiny surface and it catches a lot of lights from the objects around it. Next step, I determine where the darker lights are on the snow, because the accents will be in the end. So I do lighter parts, but not the lightest parts. I leave the lightest for the last. My main goal is to show that it's a slightly warmer and a slightly lighter part of the snow surface. And for that I use Naples yellow, gray, and titanium white. To paint the thinner branches, I use blending and glazing medium by Winsor & Newton, and I use very little amount because I am trying to keep my studio solvent free. I want to keep my solvents and my paints separately so that the paints don't dry too fast on the palette, and that is why I use a regular dinner plate as another smaller palette for more thinned down paint. One more thing, to keep my palette wet for a longer time, I use a kitchen container which is square, flat, and I close the lid whenever I'm done with the painting. And now my favorite part. I take the cheapest brush from hardware store and I use it to stamp on the shadow color, like irregular shapes of this distant snow on small branches from the trees in the distance. And here I'm using a small filbert brush and mix a lighter shade of warm color, like sunlit color, and I paint negative painting, meaning the spaces between the branches. The painting is slowly starting to look the way it's intended to. And this stage I am adding snow, and it's a shadow part of the snow on the branches, and I mix the shadow color with a little bit of Prussian blue and more of ultramarine, and I don't use any yellow. In this case it's Naples yellow. I don't use it at all. And again, I am also painting on the top and bottom sides so that the painting is dry by tomorrow. This is the last portion of my block end part of the painting. So everything is now covered with oil paint. It's this very thin layer of oil paint, and I know for a fact that it will be all dry overnight. And less than 24 hours later, I am able to apply glazing. So for glazing, again, I use my dinner plate with the same blending and glazing medium by Winsor & Newton. I mix a little bit of purple, dioxazine purple, a little bit of French ultramarine, and a little bit of burnt umber, like very small amounts of paint, so that the end result is this slightly cooler, slightly darker hue of the same color. I apply glaze to imitate multitude of thin branches and shadows of the trees. And so my top half of the painting is glazed, and that gives me a very good surface to apply thin down paint and imitate thin branches. So now I'm using Naples yellow, Portland cool gray, and titanium white to show highlights where the sun is hitting the branches. And now I changed for a smaller bright brush, and I am painting lights on distant branches. And speaking of branches, I saw that those are just too much. So I'm using the same basic mixtures, and I am covering with darks or lights. So I really like the amount of branches on the left and the right, but it just turned out too much. So I am painting where the tree trunks are, where the shadows and lights are. Fortunately, the palette is limited and it's easy to mix the same colors. And this is the end of part 1, winter, the effects of light, and we see how easy it was to paint a light on the snow using a very limited palette, and the result is quite pleasing. Hey, and don't go too far. Part 2, 3, and 4 also promise to be interesting.